and direction of the country. And then you mobilize all sectors, all resources, including the lawmakers, in order to accomplish that vision and direction. When you're a lawmaker, especially in Congress, you have a vision for your specific constituency, and of course for the country because it affects your constituency. And then you interact with the president and the president's government in a way that best suits the interests of your constituency.
Right. But what is better, president or congresswoman?
Oh, each is good in its own way. But what I like about being congresswoman compared to being president is that I no longer have to bear the weight of the entire weight of the country's fate on my shoulders.
Right. Was that very difficult?
Very difficult.
See, I wanted to really find out from you what it's like to be a woman president of the Philippines. What was it like?
Well, I'm fortunate that in the Philippines, we are one of the most progressive countries in the world, advanced countries in the world, as far as the role of women in society is concerned. And I am fortunate also that there was already a woman president before me, so that paved the way for the acceptability of a female president. So by and large, any hardship I endured as president was not by reason of my being a woman.
Mm-hmm. It's just because you're president. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if you're male or female.
I don't think so.
Is there an advantage to be a woman president compared to a...
As I said, because we're so advanced in women's rights in the Philippines compared to other countries, my presidency was generally gender neutral.
Gender neutral. In fact, when you were president, there were landmark legislation signed. We have the anti-trafficking against women and children, and also the Magna Carta for Women.
Yes.
That was, I think, landmark legislation during your presidency.
Yes. Also domestic violence.
Domestic violence. Can you tell us more about those, Congresswoman?
Well, I remember when I was still a senator, my women's agenda was twofold: protection and promotion. Protection of women against abuses and promotion of opportunities. So for protection, I tried to enact an anti-domestic violence bill, which finally got passed into law. When I filed the bill in the Senate then, it was, you see, because there's already violence, there are sanctions against violence. It was to make the domestic violence punishment one step higher than the usual violence, because a father who usually is the one who does the domestic violence, a father or a husband, is supposed to take care of the family. So there's supposed to be an additional responsibility. So not only is there the general crime against society, but the general crime against his role in the family. That was the thrust of my domestic violence bill. So finally, I got it passed into law when I was president. The other bill that I promoted, for promotion of women's opportunities, was assistance to women in micro-enterprises. I was able to get that done when I was in the Senate.
Okay. Why the interest, I guess, aside from being a woman, on domestic violence and promoting women's welfare when you were still at the Senate?
Well, as far as domestic violence is concerned, I saw a lot of domestic violence in my own going around the country and talking with constituents. We have quite a problem with domestic violence, even if we're very far over other countries on the role of women in society. Whatever is the reason, I saw that. So I filed a bill against domestic violence.
But also important, Congresswoman, would be the anti-trafficking on children and women.
When I was Vice President and Social Welfare Secretary, I saw that. I saw the problem of trafficking. And it was something noticed even by the other countries, that we were among the countries that were quite in the radar screen as far as trafficking is concerned. So I pushed for that, and I finally got it passed into law when I was president. One of our problems with anti-trafficking that I saw when I was still vice president and the early part of my presidency was we were not so good at prosecuting. So one of the things I tried to do was to bring the cases all the way to prosecution.
How do you think we're faring now, many years after?
Well, I think we've improved a lot. The fact that we are not, I think we're no longer, in fact, in the watch list. So that's a lot. That's a big improvement. The law and the implementation of the law has been good. In fact, maybe because of our vigilance against anti-trafficking, there is a little fallout, the rights of little children to be adopted. Because of the anti-trafficking regime that we have, it's very difficult for our orphans to be adopted by foreigners where they can have a much, much better life abroad.
That's also something, that's a center of your legislation as Congresswoman, right? You want to create some sort of a one-stop shop for orphans, especially, Congresswoman, if they're a little bit older so that people, Filipinos, can adopt them easier?
Now, it's very hard for foreigners and well-meaning foreigners, after all. I mean, you cannot expect every foreigner to be a trafficker.
Yeah.
The majority are well-meaning foreigners who want to take care of a child. We've got beautiful stories about foreign adoption. You know, remember that Oscar-winning film last year about Lion?
Yeah.
About how that little boy was adopted by the character of Nicole Kidman.
Yeah.
And even when he looked for his mother, his natural mother, later on, after he found her, he still went back to his adoptive parents. So that's something that I see other movies. I see, for instance, a movie where an American couple gets to adopt a Chinese baby, and we don't have that, and yet we have a lot of orphans.
All right, we'll be taking a short break. Our interview with the former president and now Congresswoman Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. After the break, please stay tuned. And we're back. Our interview today with former President and now Congresswoman Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. I want to go back to your time or your stint as president. What was the most memorable part or situation or something you look back at during your presidency?
As a woman.
As a woman president.
My presidency was generally gender neutral. But having said that, perhaps the most memorable moment was when, after the elections of 2004, when I won the elections, Forbes magazine listed me as number 4 among the most powerful women in the world. That's memorable not because it reflected personally on me, but because it projected the Philippines onto the world stage.
Did you ever think that something like that would happen, or that you would even be president, considering, of course, your father being a former president at that?
Well, I was never even interested in politics. I didn't even know I would become senator. But when I became number one senator in 1995, then the possibility of being president happened because when you're number one senator, like Marcos and even the others who didn't find, who didn't make it, like Salonga and Loren, they become presidential material, and also Grace, they become presidential material. Not necessarily that they make it, but you do become presidential material. So when I was number one in 95, then that's when it dawned on people, not just me, that I could become president. You know, Pinky, to me, that's one of the best examples of divine providence, that all things work for the good of those who have a covenant with the Lord. Had I been number 12 rather than your father, I would not have run for election in 95. I would have run for election in 98. And then having been re-elected senator in 98, I would have been among the impeachment judges of Estrada. Instead, because I only had a 3-year term, I ran in 95, and because I was number one in 95, I ran for vice president in 98. And then when EDSA 2 happened, I was in place to be president. See, if I had won number 12 in 1995, I would not have been president in 2001.
What was it like, though, to be... Did it ever feel that, or if it did, to be the most powerful woman in the country, of course, being president?
Well, I think it was President Abraham Lincoln who said, if you want to test someone's character, give him power. And I agree. And aside from character, I think you also need, from my experience and observation, you also need wisdom and experience to be able to handle power properly, because power can easily be abused and it can easily be lost. I was fortunate that my father was president 40 years before me, so I had a chance to, but by the time I became president, I had already witnessed firsthand how power can be won and lost. So perhaps I had a better perspective about power than a lot of people. If I want to give advice to younger leaders who are on the cusp of power, I think one practical advice would be not something that came from a sublime leader like Abraham Lincoln, but rather from a down-to-earth, commonsensical comedian, Jimmy Durante.
Okay.
Be nice to people on your way up because you meet them on the way down.
Yeah. A lot of people say that. Yeah. Tsaka palagi wag mong kakalimutan kung saan ka nanggaling. Kasi, anything can happen. So that is the kind of advice you would give those who... Because you already said it. I guess in a way, a lot of people say with power, you become, power corrupts. Power also corrupts.
That's what I said. It can easily be abused.
Yeah. So it's
but
really...
it can also easily be lost.
Yeah. So how would you describe your stint as president?
That what I tried to do was to continue my father's fight against poverty. And if we look at the continuum of presidencies, we can say that Cory restored democracy, FBR restored competitiveness, Estrada put the poor in the minds of those seeking development. On my part, I would say that my biggest contribution was not something as dramatic as my father's abolishing tenancy. It was more prosaic. I did the economic reforms and fiscal reforms that made our country resilient and just be able to sustain its growth. I had those very, very painful tax reforms that, of course, led me to become very unpopular. But then on the other hand, since my time, we've never had a single quarter of negative growth. And we also survived the global crisis of 2008 and following years without going into any recession. Our per capita income rose from a third world less than $1,000 to a middle income of over $2,000, and our poverty rate went down from 39% on the eve of my presidency to 26% after just after I left. So, to me, that's what my presidency was about.
When people describe you as president, they say two things. You're very hardworking and you are intelligent. What do you think you are more? Are you more hardworking when you were president, or were you more intelligent?
Hardworking.
We'll be talking about some hot issues after the break, such as charter change and Philippine-China relations. Please stay with us.
Ako si Ruth Cabal at ito ang Newsroom ngayon. Tatalakayin natin ang mga napapanahong issue na mahalaga sa inyo. Wala na raw tigil ang putukan, sila naman daw ay walang tigil sa pagdarasal. Breaking news, bomb threat daw po sa Camp Crame.
Una po nating talakayin itong mga hindi nagre-remit. Ano pong ginagawa natin sa mga ganitong kumpanya? Tingin niyo po ba ay panahon na para palitan ng eco-friendly jeep? Ano ang masasabi niyo rito? Narito ang ilan sa mga pinadala niyong comments. Bahagi kayo ng talakayan dito sa Newsroom ngayon.
We're back here on The Source with former President, now Congresswoman Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. The present situation, there is moves, of course, to amend the charter. Congresswoman, during your time, there were likewise moves to amend the charter as well. Do you still think that the charter needs to be changed?
Well, in my time, I felt that it was time to review the charter. And of course, all the more now, time has passed, so it is even more time to review the charter. There are some very obvious areas for review, for instance, foreign ownership. And then there are some very contentious questions like the form of government. But that's why all the pros and the cons should be discussed so that the people of the Philippines can be aware of, so that it can all be out in the open.
But should the form of government be changed?
Well, as I said, it should be reviewed and all the pros and cons should come out. It should be discussed so that the people will be very well aware of the issues. For instance, the federal form of government, that should be discussed. All the pros and cons should be discussed. What I like personally about the federal form of government is that it shifts power away from the center to the regions. And for that alone, it should be discussed.
Was that your stand also when you were president, that you were for a federal form of government? So you've been consistent with that. Any changes from then to now in terms of charter change? So you are for foreign ownership, you are for a federal form of government. Anything else?
Well, as I said, it's not very important what I am for. I am for a thorough discussion of the pros and cons so that the people will be made very aware of the issues.
Can we find out your thoughts on the consultative commission that the president formed? The CONCOM?
Well, it's a good commission. So we're looking forward to the draft that they will come up with to recommend. And they're also very open to recommendations to them.
Right. What about Philippine-China relations? What's your take on the seemingly closer ties between the Philippines and China?
You know, when China was beginning to awaken in the 1980s, many Filipinos were wary of China. They thought that China was potentially a rival. At that time, the world still did not realize that among Asian countries, China was a class of its own, sui generis. Today, 40 years later, we see that China is not a rival. It is a market, an investor, a donor. And when I was president, I focused on developing closer economic and business ties with China, and that is the policy of President Duterte today, very similar to mine.
But the seemingly closeness between the Philippines and China and away from the U.S., is that something?
I don't really see it that way. Going to the U.S., we have strong historical ties with the U.S., a very strong shared history with the U.S. we have very strong fundamental values that we share with the U.S., like a desire for freedom and for democracy. And we have a very strong community of friends and relatives who are Filipino Americans. So for those reasons, it is in our national interest to be friends with America. And the way that I see President Duterte, he is seeking friendship and cooperation with America, but it has to be very clearly from a position of mutual respect.
You talked about the president. The president once called you his boss. Can you tell us more about what was really the relationship, the kind of relationship you had? How did it begin with the president?
Well, I've known the president for a long, long time. I first met him in 1989, I think, when he was a new mayor of Davao City, and I was trying to bring industrialization all over the country, and Davao was one of the centers for industrialization. So that's how I met him. And then throughout my candidacies for national office, he always supported me. When I became president, in 2002, I asked him to become my special advisor on peace and order. Actually, I asked him to become my presidential advisor, cabinet rank, but because he had been elected for a fresh term again as mayor, he said that he cannot abandon his mandate as mayor, but he would do the work for me. Just give him a title that does not conflict with his being mayor. So he was my special advisor for peace and order. And we worked very closely when he was in that position. So when he called me his boss, let's put it this way. I am also an elected public servant. And I also often look for ways to give recognition to other leaders. So, of course, he is more colorful in his, the way, his personality and his speech is more colorful than mine. So I think that was his colorful way of giving me prestige and recognition, especially, I suppose, in recognition of the fact that I also once held the awesome position that he holds now. And as I said, the context in which he was calling me his boss during that event was that he was talking about the time when he was my special advisor.
Yeah.
So, but I was president then when he was my special advisor. Now he is president. And like all good presidents that have served our country, we all know that his only boss is the Filipino people.
How would you assess the president's 2-year stint so far?
Oh,
Almost 2 years.
I think he's done an awesome job. His promises about peace and order, he is complying with. And as far as his economic policy is concerned, well, his tax reform complements the tax reform that I did. And then his build is also a step in the right direction, because that is what we need now to have a good investment climate, infrastructure.
I just need to follow that up because you said that you're known to be an economist, ma'am. Some people are saying with the president's build project, posible daw na puro na lang tayong we'll be indebted. Malulubog daw tayo sa utang.
There are, it's all a matter of relativity. You can increase your debts in absolute numbers, but the important thing is, what is your debt ratio to your GDP? When I entered the presidency, our debt was bigger than our GDP. That's when you say lumulubog sa debt. But when I left the presidency, our debt was 3/4 of our GDP. And the economic manager of President Duterte are very well aware of those ratios. So yung mga baon sa utang, you look at the GDP.
So you're not alarmed by this?
As long as those ratios are complied with. When like me, when I was president, in 2007, I could have balanced the budget. But we were scheduled to balance the budget in 2008. But in 2007, I was like maybe 18 million short of balancing the budget. And we said, well, shall we balance the budget now? And I said, so I asked, we discussed it with my economic managers, and they said, well, the market is waiting for us to balance it next year. So we might as well spend the money now for our development rather than trying to balance the budget 2007. Okay, so we'll just do it next year. But I could have done it in 2007. Our deficit was de minimis. 2008 came and there was a crisis. Global crisis, not Philippine crisis, but global crisis. How did we avoid the global crisis? Well, we forgot about the balanced budget for that year because that is not the most important thing. The most important thing was to be able to pump prime the economy, create jobs, avoid the recession. As long as you stay within the parameters of good financial management, it's okay. So, in the middle of the crisis, with an upgrade in our credit rating, even if we did not balance the budget that year.
As a last question, Congresswoman, how would you describe the Filipina of today?
We are very progressive about the role of women in society. There's a lot of room for improvement, but we are among the best in the world. So I think, in general, the Filipino woman of today is fortunate that she is living in the Philippines.
Congresswoman Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo, pleasure to see you again. And good luck, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And this is the SARS on CNN Philippines. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.